Notice how it's only white majority countries that are forced to accept diversity, otherwise we're racist and colonizers? The #1 name in the UK right now is Muhammad. Let's not do that to the US. Cool, thanks, bye.
Not homegirl with one of the most Polish last names I've ever seen talking about diversity. Ma'am, the reason why you're here is because the United States accepted diversity. Believe it or not, that native part in Native American actually means something. The US is not a white country. But also, guess what? Polish immigrants came to the United States overwhelmingly to seek a better life. Much like the great majority of immigrants and descendants of immigrants in the United States, like you. And just because your ancestors decided to abandon their culture, their language, in order to assimilate into American culture and become white, does not mean that you have more claims to be here than anyone else. But unfortunately for you, yours actually kept their Polish last name, which is why I can make this video right now. And the fact that your last name is so Polish is a huge signifier that they came within the last 2 waves of Polish immigration to the United States. And by the way, the reason why Muhammad is the most popular boy's name in the UK is because the 6% Muslim minority in the UK overwhelmingly named their sons Muhammad. That's it. Whereas amongst the general population, there is far more variety in the names that people give their sons. So this bullshit fear-mongering and stupid ass narratives need to be called out each time. Because these culturalist people who have no idea where they came from need to be reminded once in a while.
Hey buddy, the reason why Americans are offended about people saying things like how we don't have a florist or a baker or a butcher in America, it's not because we're jealous or we just don't understand. It's because we're sick of people just making up shit about our own country and then not listening and telling us that we just don't get it when we try to say, actually, we do have those. Because you're just doubling, tripling, quadrupling down in these comments saying, it's just frustrating because Americans, you guys really think you know what we're talking about. You don't. And it's like, you don't think we know what a fucking bakery is? What? You have some self-centered tendencies that just make you guys think that you know everything. You don't think we know what a florist is? Bitch. Like, I know we're not just talking about the florist section in a Walmart. I'm not talking about a bakery in a Walmart. And I'm not talking about some niche town where they might have a couple of things. I'm talking about an average town in America. Absolutely does have a butcher, does have a florist, does have a bakery. And I don't care how many years you claim to have lived in America, if you want to say that it is not normal to have a baker in your city, you have not been in the majority of cities in America. And before people even say it's a small town thing, it's not even a small town thing. Because in my experience, unless you are in a bumfuck town, there's always going to be at least a baker. There's always going to be a florist. Because you know why? Those are 2 stores that always do really well in small towns. And it's a very easy mom and pop shop. So small businesses actually do really well in small towns because Walmarts don't like to go to small towns. And it's actually more and more common for Americans to prefer those types of stores over Walmart. But we have always had them. And to say that we don't is honestly just delusional. And no, Americans aren't just self-centered and think that we know everything and we're not just willing to learn about a new thing. The new thing is just something we've had for hundreds of years and we're very familiar with it. You're trying to present a concept like a florist, a store where you can go in and buy a bouquet of flowers, like it is a novel concept and not something that has been a thing for centuries. They have specialty stores all across America, and no matter what you say, that does not change the reality that Americans absolutely have bakers, absolutely have florists, and we absolutely have butchers. I swear, y'all will read something online and just run with it, and you will argue with Americans that we have no idea about our own country until you are blue in the face because you don't want to listen that maybe the world is a little bit more universal than you want to think.
Europeans are so poorly traveled that they really think their continent has cultural diversity. Like, they don't realize that basically every country might as well be the same. They think Europe has so much culture, but they don't realize that, like, country to country might as well be the same. Like, the majority of people, if you go to a country in Europe, you wouldn't even be able to tell exactly which country it was unless you were reading the language on the wall. Like, they're all basically the same. You look around, it's the same castles, the same buildings, the same streets, the same type of shit every single country you go to. There's more cultural diversity in a 15-minute drive in my town than there there is in all of England. I mean, it's basically all just the same throughout. It's crazy. Like, I'm telling you, go to somewhere in Liverpool and then go to London, they're basically the exact same. Like, talk to them for 15 minutes, they have the exact same life all the way up until that moment that you talk to them, I guarantee you. And like in Europe, you can travel an hour and be in a completely different country, but meanwhile it feels the exact same. Like, it feels the exact same, and yet you're in a different country. So they think just because it's smaller and there's more countries, that means that they're more diverse, but really it's the exact same. Meanwhile, in Virginia, you can go from one side of Virginia to the other side of Virginia. You'll have completely different accents, completely different cultures, food. Like, it's completely different in just the same state, and they want to talk about cultural diversity. It's just crazy, because whenever you talk to a well-traveled European, they barely ever even left their continent, and they want to claim to be well-traveled and cultured. Like, dude, maybe if you talk to anyone outside of Europe, you would find that you are not that culturally different than anywhere else in Europe. It is not that crazy. Like, most Europeans want to claim that they're well-traveled. Meanwhile, they've never even been on an airplane more than 6 hours. Like, hello? You've never even left Europe. Don't claim to be cultured, because you barely know anything about culture if you've only lived in Europe.
What did I just watch? What? Lady. Have you been to Belgium? Have you been to Netherlands? Amsterdam? Have you been to Spain? Have you been to Italy? I mean, Venice is nothing like anywhere you've ever seen. And I'm sorry, but Belgium, Brussels is it's totally different. And even in France, like, you go from one city to another. Like, I lived in Fougères when I first moved to France. I moved to Fougères, and this city, like, you walk around the city, you feel like you're in a fairy tale, and it's a nothing like where I'm living now in Lyon. And like, what? She's talking about well-traveled? Lady, are you well-traveled? Girl, you need some fact-checking. False.
No, diversity is not our strength. Like, look around. Do you think that it's actually working? Does it look like it's actually working? Because every country that's gone in on multiculturalism is dealing with the same exact problems. Whether that's segregated communities that do not mix, whether that's rising cultural tensions, whether that's parallel societies with totally different values, or people living in the same country but with zero sense of unity. And you also have governments that are constantly trying to manage conflict instead of building progress. That's what diversity leads to. That's what multiculturalism leads to. Now, let's look at Japan. Japan did not sign up for that Western experiment that is failing terribly. Japan said no to open-ended immigration, no to mass cultural importing, no to the idea that a country should bend its identity to please everyone else on Earth. Japan built its society around unity, right? Shared culture, shared expectations, and actual social cohesion. If you want to live there, you assimilate. You join their culture. You don't show up and demand that they change to fit you. You don't get a separate set of rules or a separate identity group inside of the country. And the results have spoken for themselves. Japan has one of the lowest crime rates in the world. They have insanely high levels of social trust. They have safe streets. They have a stable society with almost no internal ethnic conflict. They have a world-class economy and innovation without importing millions of people from everywhere else across the world. Look, I'm not against diversity in any capacity, but I am extremely 100% against the idea that diversity is our strength, that more diversity means more success. It doesn't. Or the idea that it's needed. Clearly it's not needed. Look at Japan. People in Japan aren't scared to walk out in the streets at night. They aren't afraid to take public transportation alone. They don't burn down cities when they're angry. They don't live in constant culture wars. Why? Because the country actually agrees on something, what it means to be Japanese. There's a shared framework and shared identity in Japan that we really don't see so strongly in many other Western countries, because we have started to import millions and millions of people under the banner of diversity and, well, it helps our economy, all of which are lies. Multiculturalism in the West has created a competition, not a community. It's everyone fighting for themselves, trying to protect their group, their language, their values, instead of being one nation. And the more diverse that it gets, the more divided everything becomes. And you can see this with the political polarization, the riots, the protests, the constant outrage, and the breakdown of citizenship and its trust in the government. The issue isn't immigration, it's importing cultures that refuse to assimilate and then pretending that calling it diversity magically fixes the consequences. Diversity itself isn't the issue, but the issue is pretending that there's like this equal equation and correlation to where when you increase diversity, it always comes with an increase in success and strength, which simply isn't true. Some diversity can be good, but it is not the case that the more diversity you have, the more successful your country will be.
East Asians have a one-sided beef with the other parts of Asia. I think the two driving forces behind this are colorism and the fact that East Asia has more developed economically than these other parts of Asia. But when they carry this over to the West especially, it makes no sense. East Asians are in the same category on the census with everybody else from the same continent. Actually, Pacific Islanders are grouped in there with us too. A lot of East Asians will disparagingly refer to Asians from warmer parts of the continent using the word jungle as if to mean primitive when they're not. East Asia wouldn't have developed the way that it did throughout history if not for inter-exchange between our part of Asia and everybody else. I think in the West, a lot of it comes because East Asians can achieve greater proximity to whiteness than, for example, Southeast Asians who come from less developed countries most of the time that have been war-torn by Western powers and who have darker skin. And in the last few years, it feels like racism towards South Asians has gotten extremely off the rails, not just from East Asians, but from everybody. Like, it's just okay to call them ugly or to say that their food is not sanitary when both of those things are not true. And in case some of you are really not getting it, there is a massive Chinese diaspora through all of Southeast Asia. Like, we went to every corner of that region, immigrating to trade and look for a better life. And now those Chinese people have been integrated into Southeast Asian society, but they are still Chinese. Are we gonna look down on them now too? And as for South Asia, a lot of them actually look kind of like us. Look at Nepalese people. Many of them look like us. And in Northeast India, also a lot of them look like us. But they are very South Asian. And this division within the Asian American community isn't helping us. Light-skinned East Asians might be the most white adjacent among us, but when other Asians are feeling the pain, we are feeling it too. So get your shit together and stop being weird.
I want to teach you something today. The first year of university, I studied history and political science, and we had a professor that put us onto Hofstede's 7 cultural dimensions. For me, as a third culture kid, this was the holy grail. Finally, a model that helps you depict and really understand how people from different cultural backgrounds differ to your own cultural background. This helps you really understand why, for example, Germans such as myself love rules and why maybe Mexicans thrive on flexibility. The first dimension is power distance. So how comfortable is a culture with the traditional hierarchy? If it's high, that means that they respect authority. And if it's low, that means that they prefer equality. For example, Germany ranks very low on power distance, so they prefer equality, whereas Mexico ranks much higher, which is where they actually prefer a hierarchy. The second cultural dimension is individualism versus collectivism. So the focus on I versus we. For example, China is known to be extremely collectivist, whereas a country such as Germany or a lot of other European countries are more individualist. I actually wrote my bachelor thesis on the cultural differences between Germany and China, specifically in a business context. And it's important to state here that collectivist doesn't mean everyone, it just means collectivist towards your community. Then there's the third cultural dimension, which is masculinity versus femininity, which is not what you might think. Masculine is where a country values competition and success more than a feminine country, which values care and quality of life. Then we have the fourth, which is uncertainty avoidance. How stressed does a culture get with unpredictability? Germany gets very stressed. They don't like that. Mexicans are a little bit more chill on that front. This obviously also has a lot to do with the historical backgrounds of each culture and each country. The sixth cultural dimension is indulgence versus restraint. So how much fun and pleasure people allow themselves. On the country comparison tool, Germany is very low, whereas Mexico is very high. The seventh and final cultural dimension is pragmative versus normative. That simply means that people adapt to change more rapidly, which means that they're more pragmatic, or they prefer tradition, which means that they're more normative. Of course, this is simply a philosophical theory, and as with all theories, we have to take it with a grain of salt. I think it's very cool and interesting how it can help you grasp something as elusive and hard to pinpoint, such as culture.
If colonization is the reason why all these countries are undeveloped, then why is it that Singapore, a former British colony, is now one of the richest countries on the planet?
This is such a stupid argument because colonialism comes in different forms, even under the same empire. Let me explain. So Singapore was a crucial British colony, but the purpose of Singapore to the British Empire wasn't to extract resources from Singapore. It was used as a port to transfer resources that had been extracted from other colonies back to the empire. Whereas the colonies in Africa and India, for example, were almost exclusively used to extract resources out of these places. For example, in India, all the railways built by the British Empire connect to ports because the purpose of these railways wasn't to transfer wealth around the country, it was to transfer them out of the country. And that's exactly why India was called the Jewel Crown in the British Empire. As well as this, when Singapore became independent in 1965, they were largely left to their own devices. This is not the case in many other ex-European colonies, most notably in Africa. For example, in Nigeria, Shell, a British and Dutch company, owns about 30% of their oil, and this is very similar to other African nations such as Equatorial Guinea, Ghana, and Gabon. And this is even worse in other countries. For example, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which was an ex-Belgian colony, almost the entire economy is owned by foreign corporations. And for the last 50-odd years, Western powers have stoked divisions such as funding militias in order to keep this extractive, exploitative economy. So please, next time you post a video for your 250,000 followers, please do some research because you are spreading misinformation and portraying history in a very inaccurate way.
What are the 3 most shocking cultural differences you've experienced around the world?
That's a good question. I'd say number 3, I went to Afghanistan, and also this happens a lot in Pakistan, is they marry their cousins. So it's actually very normal. It sounds crazy, but they marry them young, like 15, 16. Wow. Obviously, not everyone from these countries. Yeah. I'd say number 2, I went to America recently, and I just found the tipping culture and the portion sizes was just absolutely crazy. Yeah. Like, getting drinks yourself, you have to tip. Just everything you have to tip.
Crazy.
Tip, like,
outrageous.
Crazy. Portion sizes are just insane. Like, you ask for, like, a drink, and they bring you, like, a bucket.
And it makes sense why they're so fat.
You said it, not me. And the craziest thing that I've experienced, when I went to Yemen, they actually circumcised the women there. I think it's like 19% of women, and it's basically so they do not enjoy the pleasure of intercourse. Obviously, it means that they won't be haram, and this is why statistically it's the worst place in the world to be a woman.
Whenever people of color talk about racism, white people really like to be like, oh, but you guys genocided each other, you enslaved each other, you sold each other into slavery. But the Mongols, but the Japanese, but the Ottoman Empire. Name me a single empire by people of color that spanned the entire globe like the British Empire did. Name me a single Asian African empire that wiped out the people of one continent that it colonized so much that it needed to get people from another continent and ship them across the Atlantic Ocean to do the work that they didn't want to do. Name me a single black, brown, or yellow empire that threw its own cultural development out the window in favor of colonizing the entire planet. I'm talking they never developed any good food, their hygiene was lacking, their music was crap, and basically their entire culture they had to get from other people to the point where chicken tikka masala is their national dish. And this is not to downplay the atrocities of things like the Japanese Empire. I'm Chinese, my ancestors and I all have an issue with them. But in the United States, Japanese people have not subjugated me. In fact, they suffer from the same white supremacy that I do. You want to talk about the Ottoman Empire? Okay. Name me a single country that speaks Turkish on the other side of the world from West Asia because of colonization. Name me a single continent like Australia that black or brown people genocided and almost completely wiped out the native inhabitants to the point where they're a minority of the population in their own land. There is nothing like the European empires. There is nothing like white supremacy that you can possibly compare it to. Keep digging.
My fiance and I have just finished a pretty big argument. And I think so recently I've noticed how different or how much culture matters, how much your culture and the environment that you were raised in matters when it comes to relationships. I am of Chinese ethnicity. My parents were Chinese. I was raised Chinese with, traditional values, and he's white. He is so white. And he was raised differently than I was. And he had different role models than I did, and he just has a different way of thinking that I don't think that he's wrong, but I'm not wrong either. And I don't know how to move past that or figure it out. I don't think I really realized this or noticed this until after I came back from China. And I guess I just saw how other girls were being treated and how I deserved to be treated, frankly. The argument that we had, it's not like it was like the biggest deal, but it's the way that it's the communication, I think. Yeah, it's the communication, because I feel like men in America hide their emotions a lot more. I can't pinpoint what it is, but it's frustrating, is what it is.
What is the dumbest thing an American has ever said to you?
So my ethnicity is native Russian. It's called Yakut. We live in the far east of Russia. And our physical traits, as you can see, are Asian. I study in the States and this guy asks me, oh, where are you from? And I say, I'm from Russia. And he's like, no, I mean like, where are you from? And I'm like, I'm from Russia, motherfucker. And he's like, okay, then where are your parents from? And I say, imagine, they're from Russia too. And he's like, well, I thought that you were Asian. Fuck a motherfucker for your maka. I am Asian. I don't know how your brain works, but you think if I'm from Russia, I cannot be Asian when I'm clearly am Asian and vice versa? If you studied your geography a little bit, you will know that half of Russia, the biggest country in the world, it's really hard to miss it on the map, is in Asia. You really think that Habib Nurmagomedov's ethnicity is Russian? No, he's Dagestani, which is one of the 100 native Russian ethnicities. So yeah, I'm an Asian with Russian passport, bitch. And I got no ancestors immigrated. Don't mix your history with my history.
You see this country? That's China. You see that country? That's Japan. You see that country? That is South Korea. Trust me, I can assure you, these three countries hate each other's guts. Let me put y'all into perspective the level of hate they have for each other. Once again, that's China. And that's Vietnam. Chinese and the Vietnamese have been fighting with each other for more than 2,000 years. That's beef dating back to the Bronze Age. Believe me when I say this is more serious. They hate each other that much. You wanna have a guess who just united them? The United States have united the unholy trinity of Asia. He made us leave the World Health Organization, then the Paris Climate Accord. By the way, everybody else is in these two groups, including North Korea, and not us. He destroyed the relationship we had with Canada. Now, somehow, it's a new level of fucking embarrassment. If you don't understand how fucking bad this is, let me tell y'all a story. Remember this country, Vietnam, I mentioned earlier? In the late 1700s, Vietnam was prospering. So good old Vietnam thought that it was better than everybody else. So it isolated itself. It closed its border and stopped trading. Vietnam kept itself going for a little while, isolated, until September 1st, 1855, the French came with rifles. And they erased 500,000 Vietnamese souls from this planet. This is not 1858. All motherfuckers want to keep isolating America and pissing everybody off. I promise you, it's not just gonna be some baguette makers that comes for us.
So I just saw this video of this girl talking about Asians, and she was like, I just don't understand why I've met so many Asians and none of them identify with their Chinese side. I keep talking to them and every single time they seem so culturally like American or like white, whatever, right? And she literally goes, like, I talk to them and I don't even realize that they're like half Chinese until I look at their last name. And then right when she said that in her story, I go, that's where it is. Because as a person who isn't Asian, but I am half Taiwanese and half Vietnamese, my last name is Wen, 可是我会讲中文。然后我每个暑假我都有回去台湾。So I've been going, I speak Mandarin, and I went back to Taiwan every single summer. So guess what side I'm more connected to? Is it the side with my last name? Or the woman who raised me? You're going to match the culture most of the time of your mom. Because most of the time, I'm not saying this is broad spectrum every single individual, because I understand there will be people with Chinese people with Chinese fathers that are very in touch with their Chinese sides. I'm talking about general populace, because I read through her comments too. Every single one who was like, I identify with my Chinese side, every single one was saying that their mom was the Chinese one. Girl, you're going to adapt the culture that you were raised in the most of. And statistically speaking, most of the time it's the mom raising the kid, okay? And so, of course, you're going to adopt the culture that you're raised the most in. So, it's not like an odd situation. It is it makes a lot of sense, okay? I'm not saying I don't identify with my Vietnamese side, not saying I don't tell people that I'm half Vietnamese, but at the end of the day, I cannot speak, that I'm half Vietnamese. At the end of the day, though, I am culturally very distant. I spent more time hanging out with my Taiwanese cousins that lived in Taiwan as a kid, because I went back every summer, than I did with my Vietnamese cousins that lived in the exact same city that I did. Okay. And I just don't connect as well with my father's side because I don't speak their language. But I do with my mother's side because I speak their language. At the end of the day, blame the parents. Blame the parents.
Do you realize Italian and Greeks are white? Well, honey bunny, things are not that simple. Okay? These racial categorizations that we use, like current day, this modern day racial buckets that we put everybody in, only came to be in the 19th century, so the 1800s. There's actually a really interesting picture, like it's an old drawing from the St. Louis World's Fair that kind of puts out these racial categorizations in very easy terms. And that's kind of like how we can define our modern understanding of race. Prior to that, the term race wasn't even really used. And when it was used interchangeably with like ethnicity, which nowadays is kind of considered different, right? Like you can be ethnically one thing, but racially a different thing. Because race is like what you're perceiving. It's like literally just your skin tone. But because our entire like social system is now based off of race, particularly in the US, we've had to have new terms to describe like what we all are. So having said that, it's really important to also know that like outside of the US, people don't really use like race as the way that they define themselves because it's not so cut and dry. People really do categorize themselves based on ethnicity, tribalism, like region, etc., right? Because things are very mixed in a way that actually the US isn't, despite the fact that people say that the US is a melting pot. The US isn't because we so categorize based on these like racial buckets. So Italy is a really interesting example, and then I'll get to Greece, but Italy is an interesting example because Italy wasn't even a unified country until 1871. It was like a series of different little kingdoms, different regions, and like essentially different countries. So until 1871, they didn't even have like one Italian language that was being spoken. So they have different cultures, different languages, and different ethnicities. Take Northern Italy, for example, right? Like someone who's from Milan looks very different than someone who is from Naples, right? People who are Milanese tend to be blonde, blue-eyed, paler, like whiter skin. Northern Italy was largely under the control of Austria up until unification. So those people have a different culture from people who are in southern Italy because they were a different country, right? And the Italian that they speak is very different from the Italian that people in southern Italy spoke. The Italian that is currently in modern day Italy is also the Italian that was spoken in northern Italy. If you still go to places in southern Italy, to Naples, to Puglia, to Sicily, to Sardinia, etc., they have dialect, and a lot of the older people only speak dialect. And if you ever hear the dialect, it doesn't sound anything like Italian. Now, southern Italy, like the kingdoms of Naples, Sardinia, Sicily, etc., have a very different culture. They also have a lot more connection to Spanish people and Moors because they were on trading routes. Moors are Muslims, Arabs. And as we all know, Sicilians are what? They're very tan. They have darker features, dark hair, dark eyebrows, right? Sometimes Sicilian people, sometimes southern Italian people look like what? Middle Eastern people? Sure do. Sure do, because you know how people become tan? Not the sun, baby. It's not just generations of tanning. It's mixing and mingling. So that's why I don't categorize Italians, particularly when we're talking about this mob wife aesthetic. I'm not categorizing Sicilians as white, because they're ethnically not white, right? Northern Italians are white, but Northern Italians don't have a mob wife aesthetic. Like people who are from Milan do not have that mob wife aesthetic because they're not mobsters. That's not where the Cosa Nostra started. The Cosa Nostra started in southern Italy, where people are tan, where people are mixed with Arabs over generations and generations because of trade routes. Greece, similarly to Italy, has a lot of like ethnic mixing into it, right? Over hundreds and thousands of years, people have always mixed. You also have to remember that the borders that you see now are not the borders that have always been, right? Like up until World War I, a lot of the borders in like Southern Europe and the Middle East didn't even exist. The Ottoman Empire had to fall. So if you look at the size of the Ottoman Empire, or even if you look at like the Byzantine Empire, right? A lot of cross-pollination there. Right? So Greek people are going to be very mixed. Turkish people are going to be really mixed. Iranians, like you're going to get a lot of ethnic mixing. So things are not so like, oh, you're white, you fit in this bucket. Or like you are from Europe, therefore you are white, right? Unless you are black. That's not how people's ethnicities work, and that's not how culture works, right? Like there's always this cross pollination. So to me, when I'm saying like Greek and Italians, they're immigrants. I didn't go based on race, but also they're not white the way like a British person is white, or the way that like an American person whose grandparents like started in the UK are white, right? They aren't white. They are a mix. Southern Italians are mixed with Arabs. Greeks are mixed with Arabs. Arabs are mixed with them. Like it is like constantly churning. And that's why there's so much cultural mixing in that region of the world. That's why you see like hummus in all these different nations. That's why you see like a tomato and cucumber salad in 8 different countries, because like those borders weren't really borders, and people have been trading around and like intermarrying for hundreds and thousands of years. And again, like, do Greek people and Southern Italians look white? No, they don't. No, they do not. They look tan. Why? Because they're mixed.
I think anybody who's willing to be honest with themselves and has spent significant time in any anime space, either online or in person, I think they can verify that the anime community can be pretty racist. And that's not just coming from like black cosplayers getting comments like, oh, this character isn't black. But even within the representations of black or darker skinned people in anime, for example, this, whatever the fuck this is, this, the list goes on. That's not to say there's no good depictions of black people in anime. This little grid was online with some depictions of darker skinned anime characters that were done well. But unfortunately, the majority of them are still pretty bad. And a lot of people do ask why this is, and the general answer that people go for is that Japan is not that diverse. There's not many black people in Japan, and these mangakas just don't bother to do any research on how to draw black people. But I think that's the easy answer, and there's some historical nuance to this. I mean, sure, they might not see any black people, but it's not like they just drew an anime character and just made the skin dark and didn't think about, oh, hair texture and features. No, these oftentimes include a lot of tropes that come straight out of, I don't know, antebellum period America. I mean, just look at the fact that there's this mascot that is straight up Pickaninny style, and it is Japanese. So I think part of the reason you see that kind of like the outline with the lips and like the no eyebrows, that kind of thing, comes from the way that Japan was exposed to black people. And it did not start with World War II. Um, Japan had ongoing trade with Portugal for a great period of time before they would trade with any other Westerners. And I actually learned that today when I Googled it, Pickaninny comes from likely a butchering of the Portuguese word for Pinquite, I think it was just like small, little, whatever. And so the importation of those style of products to Japan did occur, and especially occurred in the mid to late 1800s when Commodore Matthew Perry from America broke down Japan and was like, hey, I demand trade. Also, side note, this is how they depicted him. I just think it's kind of funny. But yeah, so unfortunately, in the 1800s, minstrel shows were still pretty popular, and they were something that did happen on ships with sailors and other like performers who traveled around to entertain soldiers. This is actually a Japanese depiction of one of those minstrel groups, and if you look closer, you can see that they are white people in blackface. So obviously we've established that this kind of racist imagery has been exported to Japan for quite some time. And on top of that, there were certain Western intellectual ideas that Japan embraced during the Meiji Restoration era. They were trying to modernize, and then they thought modernization meant Westernization. So they took a lot of Western ideas and technologies and applied them to their own context. One of those was social Darwinism. They did a little special take on it where they had Japan at the top, but it was still this idea of race. And obviously, race is something that is man-made, and like just look at the way Japan treated other Asians. They didn't think, oh, Asians, we're all Asian, Asian unity. They're like, Japan's special, we're at the top. But with social Darwinism, it obviously comes the idea that white men are up here and black men are down here. And so America has been pretty, I don't know if I'd say, I don't want to say responsible because that sounds like I'm excusing Japan on this, but they have encouraged the spread of racial hierarchies that, you know, even if Japan takes it and says, oh, if white men are at the top and black men are at the bottom, Japanese men are above white men, it's still, you know, exporting that idea. And you can really see that in the wake of World War II. So after Japanese surrendered, there were a lot of like comfort women, prostitutes, just, you know, people who were either destitute and just had to do whatever they could to get by. And the Japanese government at the time, whatever, you know, group that they formed after the emperor surrendered, they were like, they formed this commission for the Western recreation of um, American soldiers, and they were scared that these American soldiers would come and assault the pure Japanese women, and so they had a group of women that they already viewed as tainted, who were either comfort women, prostitutes, or poor women, and they would designate them to be the sexual service for American soldiers. But even within that, there was a racial divide. If a Japanese woman serviced a black man, she was then no longer allowed to service a white man. That's how the American military wanted it. They did not like that racial mixing. And that's also kind of why I hate when people say, oh, it's not all about race. Why do black people try to find a problem in everything? Like, it is about race. I mean, my mom can remember when desegregation happened in schools. Like, the prevalence and just the deep rootedness of anti-blackness and the way it has been exported all around the world is very real and very harmful. And trying to pretend that that's not the reality that we live in, that's just burying your head in the sand. And so this is just kind of going to try to give some depth to the questions about like why there are this type of visual trope and yeah, racist depictions in Japanese media. And I think that this kind of framework can be applied to a lot of different Asian countries who, you know, frankly, are oftentimes don't deal with very many citizens that are not of their specific ethnic group or racially Asian. And so when they do see these outsiders or foreigners or whatever, they're drawing upon what they do know. And a lot of it does come from racist Western depictions of Black people.